Welcome back to the channel, guys, and you join me here for the GT3 build at Response Motors. Now, we're located in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you haven't checked us out, come on by if you're in the area. We'd love to have you. We just had a great Cars and Coffee. Also, link in the description below for our website as well as right below me here. So, in today's video, what we're going to do is finally finish up that seam sealing and shoot some undercoating on the front end. That should wrap that up. And then in the back, we finally got the piece for that rear side that we've been waiting on. It was considered a structural piece from Porsche, even though it really isn't structural at all. It's really just cosmetic. But we're going to weld a little bit, probably. We're going to use some adhesive, some rivets, and get that fixed so that we can get this thing off to the body shop. So I've got all the stuff ready to go to start prepping this thing, sanding it down, and we have a very short window now to get it ready and get it over to the body shop. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications because we've got new content coming every week.
I forgot to record a good cutscene where I explain what I'm doing here, so you got me on mic now. We're going to just finish putting on that seam sealer. So I've actually changed the tip of the gun to start spraying sound deadening pads, which is what I'm doing here. So what Porsche does is they spray sound deadening all over the front wheel well area, so keep down road noise. So I'm kind of putting on a thick coat of the seam sealer slash sound deadening material, which is really covering up a lot of that seam seal that I put down that I wasn't super happy about before. So, and it ended up looking pretty good. Also, an important note is I covered up all of the bolt holes for the suspension. So you really don't want to get any material in there because as you go to thread in the bolts, especially for the control arms, you want to make sure they clamp well and all the torque you're applying is going into clamping that joint, not to getting rid of seam sealer or any other material in the joint. So I've already prepped the surface, by the way. So I scuffed it down with a pad. It's about, I don't know, about 1,000 grit, and made sure I removed any extra paint there, cleaned it with a degreasing agent before I put this on. So you make sure it's all nice and clean. All this is going to get painted over anyway, so you're not really going to see it. And on top of that, the wheel liners go in here and the body covers all this stuff. So really this is for my own sake, that I want it to be nice, well sealed, and get rid of a lot of that tire noise. The one thing you'll note here as I'm playing around with the gun is it went through a lot of material. So I sprayed a ton of this stuff. I went through several cans on each side, and I still didn't get quite to the level that Porsche did when they do it for the factory. So you can kind of see over onto the left side there on the firewall, there's a pad I left. I scuffed it up, but left them a lot of material Porsche had put down, and it's like maybe a 1/16 thick or a little bit more. So I tried to get as much in there as I could, but I just kind of ran out of material. So perhaps it'll be a little bit louder, but I ended up spraying a bit on the inside, which you'll see in a second here, because I wanted to make sure I got rid of as much tire noise as I could, and I figure I'm doing this, so let's go ahead and just apply some. So here I'm doing the underside of the frunk. It came out pretty factory looking, other than me running out of material again. So I put on a pretty thick coat. I scuffed it, of course, beforehand, covered up all the seam sealer I'd already done there with the sound deadening pad. Porsche puts this on mostly for stone guard, but overall I think it worked really well, and I'm pretty happy with the results. So here I'm spraying the inside. Porsche doesn't do this from the factory because most likely they just don't want to use the material. But I figure, well, this is going to just help cut down on some of the NVH into the cabin. So I'll go ahead and spray it in. It just helps seal it up a little bit. Plus gets rid of a little bit of that ugly weld and whatnot I had on the bottom. So might as well.
And that is that. It took a while to get this done, and it was a pain. It was just a mess. But the sound deadening pads actually went pretty well. So other than using an enormous amount of material, like you can see still under here where Porsche's pad, the stock pad is, and I sprayed and sprayed and sprayed, it still wasn't building up enough material, and I was plowing through cans. I bought another like 6 cans, and they're $25 a piece on top of the half dozen I'd already bought. And I barely had enough to do this. So I think it came out actually pretty well. I mean, this looks relatively stock right here. So this is just for stone guard underneath the frunk. Now Porsche does not spray the sound pads in here. I decided to do this just to cut down on some of the tire noise. Yeah, it's a GT3, but I want to hear the engine. I don't necessarily want to hear tire noise. So I sprayed a little bit extra in here and it just kind of cleaned it up, make it look nice. This is where the majority of the material went. This is where Porsche sprays. And then in the factory, you can see they take a brush and they just wipe this down. At first, I thought that was aftermarket, but I actually watched the videos of them producing these things and I see a guy in there wiping it down with a paintbrush. So this is all done. Finally, we're finished with the seam sealing. It actually worked out pretty nice. I mean, it's not super factory, but it looks pretty good. It's gonna get cleaned up a little bit more before we paint it. But all in all, I'm pretty happy. So you can see the sound deadening under here. When all this is painted and done, you're not really going to notice it anyway, and I'm kind of obsessing over this area in here, which is where the fuel tank goes, so you're never really going to see it.
So once again, I forgot to film a nice intro to what I'm doing, but what I'm starting to do here is attack that damage in the left rear. Now this is where the car obviously landed on something, most likely a curb from the looks of the material I started pulling out of the under trays, if you remember in the first video. So I'm trying to straighten the flange where the outer fender attaches to the inner structure of the vehicle. This isn't really a big deal. It's mostly cosmetic here. You can see a little bit more inboard. That's the structural piece and it only has a little bit of a dent on it. So this is mostly cosmetic and to seal it up. So I'm trying to flatten as much as I can of the original material and then I'm going to go ahead and just cut it out. So I'm kind of removing any of the damage now. I'm trying to be really careful using a Dremel tool. I chose the Dremel instead of using a big grinder because it's just a lot more precise. It definitely takes longer, but you can be more precise with it. So some of you are probably saying, hey, why don't you just replace the entire fender, or really it's the entire side of the car, because that would have taken care of the front piece and the rear. Maybe that would have been better, but looking at how much work that is to do, it's an enormous amount. You have to break the entire bottom flange, you have to actually cut the piece out of the car, and then you've got to stitch it in all the way across in the roof line and the windows. So I opted, since this, well, again, wasn't structural, it's just cosmetic, and really you're not even going to see it because the side skirt covers this in the under trays. I was just going to go ahead and cut it out and then go bond in a piece from the donor car, which you'll see me do in a minute. So here I'm just drilling out some of the rivets, getting rid of a lot of that adhesive, grinding down any of the extra rivets, and now I'm heating it up so that I can split the rest of the panel off. It looks a lot worse than it is. It actually really wasn't too bad. Didn't take me too long to get this thing off.
Quick refresher on the surgery here in the rear. So let's just go over this. Had some sort of accident in the back. So you can kind of see, if you look through the car, you can see that this side is bent and then this side is also a little bent up. My guess is as the car ran into something in the front, it lifted up, then dropped back down on whatever that was here. So luckily the floor pan is actually in pretty good shape. There's a little teeny dent here, which we can get out, but otherwise it's just mostly this corner, because on the other side it's superficial. So I went ahead and I removed the entire rear piece here, because this piece is actually one long extrusion. And then Porsche puts in a separate piece because you've got this flared out fender for the rear that holds the kind of the outside bottom here and just kind of ties everything together. Porsche calls it a structural piece because it's mounted to the structural piece of the car, which is this aluminum piece here, but it really isn't. So this is the one I took off from the car, and as you can see, it wasn't the easiest thing to get off in a nice way. It actually wasn't terrible to remove, but it's all bent up and everything because they welded the front and then it's adhesive in the back and it just doesn't look great. So what I had to do is order one from Porsche. It was like $100, but of course it's a structural piece, so I had to get it from overseas, so it took a while to get. So here's the new one. Fresh from Porsche. Looks like the stuff in the front, it's already primed. So what I'm gonna do is take this guy and I'm gonna fit it up in here, and I haven't decided yet if I'm gonna weld the ends, because when I removed it, you can see there's a couple welds here that Porsche did on this piece. So I think there's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But I don't know if I really need to do that. Again, this isn't really a structural component. It's super thin. It's like, you can just bend this by hand. It's just cosmetic. So what I might do is just use adhesive, because you've already got rivets and adhesive holding it in the back. And then the nice thing is this comes with this flange. So when I pop it up, you'll see that most of this flange now will be taken up by this new piece. And I'll only need to patch in a little bit from the other car, and I'll have a nice surface to glue to. So I think I can make this look pretty nice and get it back to looking factory without a lot of welding and screwing around. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean this stuff up. So I'm gonna grind down some of the damage, smooth all this out, get rid of the extra adhesive, make sure the rivets are gone. Then I'm gonna fit this panel up, see how we're doing, and drill out some of the holes so we can get this riveted in. And then we'll mount it up. Then I'll put in some of the seam sealer here, and we're gonna be putting on new undercoat, which is actually going to fill all this on the side anyway, before we do paint. So I'll probably just take off the undercoat and then we'll leave that right before we do paint. So let's get to it. It's got a lot of work to do. So we're gonna start by cleaning this up. It's a little hard to film. We've kind of cramped in a corner here. I was gonna put this car onto the cart I bought, but we still need to get on the bottom here, so it's a little hard to do, and I don't have a full rotisserie. So I'm gonna use my wire brush, clean this up, and then I'm gonna get out the grinder, well, I should say the sander, and I'm gonna sand off some of the extra kind of damage here, clean this up a bit, get the rivets pushed out, and then we're gonna fit up that piece. It's looking quite a bit better. Cleaned it up. So now we can see this piece fits in pretty nice. So I'm probably gonna have to drop this back onto the ground just so I can get in here because the lift is in the way. So I'll drop it down, put this side on a jack stand. I'll be on my back, so it's gonna be a little hard to film, but I'll be able to drill out the holes and get this guy squared up so that we can get it mounted. And then you can see I just have to glue in a patch panel from the other car and we're all set. So let's get it down, get this guy fitted up. Welcome to the floor. So, got it down on a jack stand, which gives me a lot more accessibility here. I'm gonna start by drilling these out, see the remainder of the rivets in the body, and then this needs to be adjusted a little bit. We'll fit that piece up and see about getting a template to get these holes drilled in the new piece, because it doesn't come with any holes. And then we'll get it fitted up. I'm just gonna use adhesive rather than welding. My guess is they used welding here because they just wasn't part of the process to do adhesive. So it's easier to weld it, but I'm gonna clamp and use adhesive because I don't wanna weld anymore in this car. And given it's a cosmetic piece, it should be fine. It's just a filler panel. So let's get these drilled and then we'll get it mounted up. So I used the other part as a template and drilled these out. Fits pretty well. Holes line up nicely. So I'll expand these out and then rivet in to the car. So that's gonna clamp this side. And I've been sitting here thinking, why does Porsche weld? So they weld on the side here. So these tabs were originally welded. And then they weld down here. So they weld kind of a few spots along the bottom. I'm like, why would they do that? Seems unnecessary for a piece of thin sheet metal. And then I realized they don't bond it because they can't clamp it. So you can clamp it back here. So you can clamp to this, and they have the rivets here to clamp. And then they can't clamp here because you've got bolts running through that they've already put in. And so they're not gonna put in rivets and stuff on this side or more bolts. So they can clamp here because you've got rivets that you can put in. So over here, there's just nowhere to clamp anything. But because I'm not in a factory and I don't care much about tack time, I can clamp this. So I can actually use a jack and just put force on this and leave it overnight and leave it alone while the adhesive hardens. So instead of welding, I am going to glue this piece in. So I'm going to rivet the back and the sides, and I'm going to glue this and clamp it, and then I'm going to use a floor jack actually, and I'm going to force this into position and hold it there while it cures. So that way I can avoid trying to weld again very thin sheet metal to very thick metal. And this, again, this thing is just, it's a bracket to hold the outer fender here, because Porsche has this flare out to the wider fenders on the GT3. So not a big deal, it's not really that structural, but I'm gonna close this out by gluing it in. So I'm gonna first start by getting this prepped, then we're gonna go ahead and put on the adhesive, shoot in the rivets, and then I'm gonna put this here and get the jack in place to keep it in place. So let's go. Okay, let's take a look how we did. So we got the rivets in, looks good. This side is nice and glued. So the big thing in why you welded this is because getting this piece glued in is tough because you can't really rivet it. But what I've done is I've actually put this jack in this piece of wood and I've compressed this joint all across here. And the weight of the rear of the car, on the left side at least, is crushing this thing into place. So this should be good. I put some extra adhesive in there. So I'm gonna let it sit overnight and hopefully this guy stays in place, and then we'll put this extra flange in here that kind of goes over, and that's it. It is the next day. I apologize for the bad audio. I broke my microphone again, but you can see this piece is now mounted. It looks pretty good. So got the rivets in, got lots of adhesive around because I wasn't entirely sure where it was gonna end up mounting, but I clamped it, I put the rivets on, and then I used my jack to hold piece up, and now it's very, very secure. So worked surprisingly well, and that maintains that nice shape. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna cut a piece off the donor car that fits in here, and then we're gonna glue it up. So let's do that. I cut off this piece. So because there was so much damage here, when I cut this piece off originally from the car, it was tough to get this totally straight. So it was a little bit wavy, not the best fit I'd want, but it actually comes in pretty well. And once we glue it and then get everything set, I think it's gonna look really good. So next up, now that we cut this piece off, the other car mounted up here, cleaned up, we're gonna go ahead and glue it in place, and then we'll let it dry overnight and see how it is. So let's check out the side. This is all done. Up next now, we just have to remove any of the extra panel bond, and then we're going to add a little bit of Bondo just to make sure this is smooth and it's a good transition. We'll clean this up. You can see the panel mounted nicely. There's some wood left from where I had it jacked up. So I will put some seam sealer on here, and then we'll go ahead, sand it, and get it ready for paint. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for hanging in there this week. I know it took a little bit longer, and mostly because I was just waiting on a lot of product and ended up using about 6 additional cans of seam sealer, which just took forever to get here. But now it is done. We finished putting the sound deadening pads. We sealed everything, including the back. We put in those patch panels. So now we're finally ready to start scuffing the body for paint. Very excited about that. I'll reveal the color soon. In fact, I might do a poll to see what you guys think it is, and then we'll reveal it in a few weeks. I don't know, we'll see. But if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because we've got new content coming, hopefully every week.